Good morning. This is Paul Sir. Really happy to be back with you on the basketball show on Sports 1440. I have to admit, coming back to that song is it's really hard for me because that's my son Ben, who passed in April of 2023, and it's part of a new album that's just being released right now and will be part of a fundraiser in Ben's honor that will be held at the Starlight Room on Saturday, January 18th. There are an innumerable number of acts that will be performing that night, performing their own music, performing Ben's music, and all of the funds raised from the sale of the new album of Ben's songs that were not released prior to his passing are going to be going to charity to benefit mental health causes. So there are tickets that are available for this show. We'll get that information to you later on. But when you have something very real like that that's in your life, it's something I just have to share prior to going into the reason why we're here, which is the basketball show back on the air. We've been gone too long. I am so happy to be joined by my partner, Ryan Reed. Ryan, good morning.
Good morning, Paulie. There's lots of stuff to discuss today with Basketball World, and I'm excited to be back, too.
Well, you can text us your questions, your insights at 833-401-1440. Again, 833-401-1440. Now, normally I think when you start up again, you would start out with a bunch of remarks, and we're going to get to that later in the show. But we had to go, I think, to an opportunity that you just cannot quantify to be able to start out this show, this new season, with my upcoming guest is such an honor and a privilege. One of the great basketball people in the game in general, but certainly an institution in Canada. And I am pleased to be joined by my good friend, Mr. Jack Armstrong. Jack, good morning.
Hi, Paul. Good morning. How you doing? Ryan, good morning. Thanks for having me on. I'm thrilled to be on with you. I'm in Detroit right now. A few hours from now, we'll be playing the Pistons. So just getting ready for the game here. So honored to be on with you guys.
Well, Jack, the honor is all ours. Let's jump into the season. I'm going to give you a contrast. The other night against the Cleveland Cavaliers, the unbelievable Cleveland Cavaliers, in terms of a historic start to their season. That I'm very curious, Jack, on your take on the success that Cleveland's had. But the other night, the Raptors played great and did everything but beat them. I think they shot close to 60% for the game. And that was on a back-to-back the night before they lost, I'd say rather convincingly, to the New York Knicks. And then they go into Cleveland coming off a big victory over the very strong OKC Thunder. So the Raptors, like I said, did everything but win the game. Here's my question to you, Jack. Now that they're healthier than they've been, Brown is still a problem. But now that they're healthier and we have a lot of their core guys, is this the core that Masai Ujiri can build into a winning team?
I hope so. Only time will tell, quite frankly. You have some difficult games coming up here in this next stretch, and they haven't been very consistent defensively. So that that's been an issue. I do think there's some good pieces here, and the question is, you need to go through it to actually have the answers to the questions. And until I see it play out before my eyes, I don't know the answer to it. I think that, individually, I can see a lot of guys and you go, okay, like this one, like this guy, like this guy, like this guy. But now how do they mesh? And when you mesh then or don't mesh, you find out what your needs are. And I think that's going to be the process here the next few months that'll give them the ability to say, okay, this is the type of player we have to draft. Okay, what are our needs? And then how do we go about fixing them? Do we need to go about our needs? And you're going to have to go about your needs in a few different ways. You're going to have to draft it. You're going to have to sign it free agents from a free agent perspective. You're going to have to trade for it. And those are going to be the ways that you navigate it. So to me, I think that's going to be clearly what's coming up here. And I think the thing I like about it is this part of the season, now that they're healthy, you're playing really good teams. And you'll get the games will give you the answers. And, I call it the level of exposure. And the more you play good teams, the more they expose you for what you have as assets and what you have as detriments. And to me, I think that's going to be the critical element for the Raptors as we go forward here.
Let's talk about some of those pieces, Jack, that you're referring to. R.J. Barrett has had, statistically, a breakout season. Have you seen, in your opinion, the fact that R.J. has had to play a lot of times undermanned, with some of his top teammates like Scotty Barnes, for instance, being hurt? Quickly has been hurt for a good part of the season. But R.J. has really stepped up. Do you think his game will translate into that successful nucleus that the Raptors are going to be trying to build for the long term?
I sure hope so, because I've seen a lot of things from him that have grown on me. I think the biggest thing that has jumped off the page at me about him is that he's got really nice playmaking skills that I didn't realize that he had. So that has been a pleasant surprise, from that standpoint. So I think he has a pretty good feel for what's going on around him. We know he's a tremendous scorer going to the basket. But the playmaking has really impressed me. Things I think he can improve on. Obviously, he's got to become a little bit better three-point shooter. He's got to become a little bit better free throw shooter. I think he's definitely got to become a much better defender. I think those would be the three things. If the old classic exit interview, sit down with the coach in the office at the end of the year, those would be the three things I'd say. You got to shoot the ball better. 3-point range. You got to become you're a driver. You're one of the top 10 in the league in terms of points in the paint. You're going to get fouled. You got to punish defenses for making that mistake of fouling you by being that much better as a free throw shooter. Get up into the high 70s, low 80s, be a 38% 3-point shooter. And I think the other thing would be just he's got to become a much better defender. I think there are times that defensively he's lacking. And I think but the thing I like about him is he's got a great floor game. He can pass it. He can absolutely score. He's a tremendous competitor. He's got confidence. He's got swag. So there's a lot of good there. And the things that can be fixed from a skill perspective offensively are definitely fixable. And I think from a defensive perspective, I think that's a mindset that has to improve, that has to get better. That I think for them in this league, at that position, you can't get your 2 or get your 3 and then give it right back. So that would be. But I think he definitely is a guy that is one of the better young players in the league and one of the most improved players in the league right now.
I'm talking with Jack Armstrong from TSN, joining us on the basketball show in our first episode of the season. And Jack, okay, so we've got one piece of the puzzle in RJ, and you've done a great job of breaking down strengths versus weaknesses. One final question I'd have on RJ's defense. Like you mentioned, it's a mindset. Is your big concern mostly on ball, team defense, or both?
Both.
Okay.
There's no doubt. When I watch him play, I think there are times that he's got to do a better job keeping the ball in front of him. And then there are times off the ball that, he kind of falls asleep a little bit, ball watches, and his guy beats him to a cut or, gets hung up on a screen, things like that. So, again, it's all – but, when you're on a team that's struggling, a lot of guys in and out of the lineup, everyone talks about offensive consistency. When you're plugging guys in, defensively, and they haven't had as many reps. And, they're going to miss their assignments. And then when they miss their assignments, your assignment gets harder because you get put out there on an island by yourself. And to me, I think that becomes a real issue. So I just think, for me personally, I just think those are the three things that if I had to nail it and say, those are the things I'd like to see him improve, those would be it. But there's a lot of good there, and there's overwhelming good, and there's overwhelming potential. So I think you got something really good there.
Okay, Jack, so that's one piece of the puzzle. I'm going to go to a real quick tangent. There's a lot of criticism, and I think naively so is the best way to put it, that they don't play defense in the NBA anymore. I think like the athleticism that is on display night in and night out in the NBA is unbelievable, unparalleled in terms of its history of the game from number 1 to number 12 or 15 on the bench. It's remarkable. Defense is really hard to play in the NBA, in the modern NBA game, A, because the offensive players are so good. This is my theory, Jack. The offensive players are so good, but B, also because of the restrictions that are placed on the defenders and how they have to guard. Are those valid points in your opinion?
Yes, absolutely. And the other element of it is there's such an emphasis on three-point shooting, and there's so many good three-point shooters. And so therefore, you have people 25, 27 feet away from the basket that you have to guard, and you have to shade to them. When you do that, that creates space. And when space exists, then good luck. I joked about it before about being on an island. Good luck being on an island having to guard Trae Young in space. Good luck being on an island, tonight guarding Cade Cunningham. That's not easy. When you are mano a mano and you got to keep the guy contained and controlled, that's hard to do. And so I think defense teams looked like they were playing more defense maybe 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, because the court was constricted and it was more physical, and you can get from point A to point B quicker than you can now. Going from point A to point B to point C and rotating and helping and recovering and multiple effort, stunting and all the different things is a lot harder because you're coming from a longer distance. And space has a way of really having a detrimental effect on defenses. So it doesn't look like teams are playing it, but a part of it is because they're getting stretched out more. And when that happens, you look bad because you can't get from A to B in time, and it doesn't look like you're trying when, in fact, you are trying. You just can't get there. And being able to guard a great, I'll never forget Hall of Famer and former Hall of Fame player, Hall of Fame coach, Lenny Wilkins, when he coached the Raptors. I remember chatting with him. He said, Jack, it's not only difficult, it's almost next to impossible when having to guard an an elite NBA player in space. Because I think it's almost impossible to guard a guy with incredible ball skills straight up, and that's a telling statement. But now, and you add what Lenny said, and then you add it to the fact that now you have you have two guys standing 25 feet from the basket that are 40% 3-point shooters, and now I have to guard this guy straight up. There's a chain reaction that makes it look really bad for the defense when, in fact, they're trying their hearts out.
Really interesting, Jack, to get that kind of delineation. I appreciate that, as I know our listeners do as well, because what you see isn't necessarily what is actually happening on the court. And you just did a wonderful job of breaking it down into the nuances about just how good these guys are. Anybody who's been to an NBA game, anybody who's seen NBA practices, This is just a whole different deal, isn't it, in terms of the kind of athlete with the kind of skills all blended together that go out on the court. And when you put 10 players of that kind of ability out there, you really, it's almost too much for the average mind to really process about what is really going on out there.
Well, look, today's player is very specialized. Unfortunately, a lot of these guys, the only sport they play is basketball. I think too often parents are pushing kids, in not only in our sport, but all sports, into specializing at an earlier age because there's such a pressure for scholarships and money and status and opportunity and all that. So rather than having a well-rounded athlete who's played a number of sports, who's played for different coaches, had different teammates, had different life lessons, and is more of a player, now it's more of a talent. So you have a lot of players that are really good talents, but are they really good players? And I think that's the true challenge. You know, you mentioned Cleveland earlier. I think the thing I really love about Cleveland, watching them play, obviously they're a rarity in our league today. They're playing two bigs for a good percentage of the time, but they have good three-point shooting, but they really share the ball, and they enjoy each other's company, and the pass is cool. And they have a lot of players, guys that think the game and play the game the right way. And so, you know, when you put all 10 together on the floor and try to figure it out, that's a lot of times the challenge. Which guys actually are players and can think on their own 2 feet and process. I'll never forget, he was our team psychologist for a number of years, Dr. Brian Shaw, who's still very active with NHL and MLS with their Players Association. He's a brilliant guy, and he said to me, Jack, always remember, this is not chess. This is turbo chess, and it's a big difference. And when you watch an NBA game and you watch it played at the highest level, it's turbo chess. It's the same thing when I'm a big football fan. We play here tonight in Detroit. We charge back, and I'm going to the Buffalo Bills Broncos playoff game tomorrow. And when you watch quarterbacks, it's, you know, you look at the Tom Brady's and the Patrick Mahomes and the Josh Allens and the Lamar Jacksons, Bo Nix's, whoever it is, Justin Herbert. It's processing at the highest level because it's incredible. And it's the same thing in the NBA. And I think there's a big difference when you get players that are talents versus guys that are actual players. And I think when you have a team filled with players that are incredibly talented as well, you give yourself a great chance. And I think for the Raptors, that's going to be the big thing, is as the lessons go along, and I like the style of play Coach Starko's trying to teach. Now it's a matter of seeing which guys can really process it and play it at a very high level.
So well delineated, Jack. And we're talking to Jack Armstrong, voice of the Raptors, here on the Basketball Show on Sports 1440 on this beautiful Saturday morning. I promised our listeners we will get back to the Raptors, but I do have another question for you about the modern player that I think you alluded to, but I think is a critical factor in this game. You mentioned how Cleveland loves playing together. They have an unbelievable culture. I think you have to say the same exact thing, Jack, about OKC. I mean, they have a superstar in Canadian Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. In my opinion, you know, right there with Nikola Jokic for MVP this year. But they also have that culture. Culture in basketball is so critical. And what are the key elements of a basketball team's culture that can help them on the path to success, Jack?
Well, geez, I mean, it's a team sport. That's the most important thing. So you have to be committed to something bigger than yourself. I think that would be the most important thing, is getting over yourself and sacrificing for the greater good. And that starts on the defensive end. I think if you watch Oklahoma City play, I think there's a sacrifice and effort on that end for the greater good. And then you have a a superstar who is humble, and is a great teammate and a great person. And, so when you have that, when you coach players with character, the character coaches the team itself. And when you have a player of that magnitude, as you mentioned with Shea, it makes everyone else's job that much better. And think about it, right now they're missing two critical pieces on their team. Chet Holmgren and Caruso right now aren't even playing. And you look at what they're doing, even without those guys, it's pretty remarkable. So I would agree. And the game that was played Wednesday night in Cleveland between Oklahoma City and Cleveland, I think was great for our sport. And these are two teams to be celebrated. You'll have these morons from big markets, big media people say, well, it's not good for the NBA. They need these teams in Chicago and LA and New York and Miami and yada, yada, yada. And I think that's complete nonsense. I think we need to focus more on the real fan rather than the Madison Avenue nonsense of hype and all that other stuff. But if you're a real basketball fan, if you can't enjoy watching the Thunder Cavs play the other night, and again, the average, you'll have morons say, well, no one will watch the NBA Finals if those two teams make it. And I'm like, well, shame on those people. They're shallow people that we don't want watching and supporting our sport. I mean, from a revenue perspective, I get it, and it's a business, and I get it. But ultimately, it should also be about the celebration of the game. And I think sometimes people have lost their minds about what really should matter.
Jack, you have just, I think, you have answered and quantified observations that I think are critical for sports fans, not just basketball fans, to, I think, understand and look at, to appreciate the games that they're watching. But to me, it's like, if that's the kind of league you want, go back to the original six. Just pick your six biggest markets and have your teams play there if that's what you're committed to. But when you look at the job that's been done in Cleveland, in Denver, in Oklahoma City, in small markets to build these wonderful teams up, and then to have that kind of response that it's bad for the league, there's something wrong with those people at the league level. And unfortunately, Jack, what seems, we've talked for over 20 minutes, it seems like two. This is terrible. I want to talk to you for hours, and we've got to go to commercial break. Jack, I hope we can schedule in the next very short while to have you back on. We will get back to the Raptors in our next conversation, but just getting your insights today has been just marvelous.
Well, Paul, always a pleasure, and thrilled to be on with you. And got a game tonight, so a little bit busy today on a game day, but hopefully be able to join you at some point down the line later in the season. And but I'm glad to hear your voice and that you guys are back on the air doing the show, and continued success. And look forward to seeing you down the road.
Sounds great. Jack Armstrong, TSN, voice of the Toronto Raptors, joining us on the basketball show here on Sports 1440. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking with Ben Golliver, the NBA beat writer for the Washington Post, in a great interview that I know you're going to enjoy. We're really going to go into the weeds on the next one as well. Stay tuned, and we'll be back right after these messages. Tip-off of the basketball show. I'm your host, Paul Sir. Thanks so much for making time to be with us today as we get back into the art of talking hoops. And what better way to talk hoops than with a hoops artist like my next guest, Ben Golliver, who is the lead NBA reporter for the Washington Post, one of the preeminent NBA reporters in the U.S., talking about all things NBA. Ben, thanks so much for making time, and welcome back to the program.
It's my pleasure, Paul. Great to hear your voice. I hope all is well. Let's rock.
Let's rock. We got a lot to talk about. Let's start at 30,000 feet. I've got a lot of questions for you, but let's go right up into the sky and talk about the NBA season so far. It's been an interesting year with some narratives that I think are worthy of a bit of a deep dive. One of them, of course, being the discussion about some sagging viewership. But talk about the Eastern. Let's start with the Eastern Conference. Is it what you've expected so far? And of course, we'll dive into the West in just a moment. But tell us about what you see in the East as we're a third of the way, well over a third of the way into the season now.
Well, what's so fascinating about the East is coming into the season, it was sort of like, Celtics versus the world. They're in this title defense looking like they have the best chance to go back-to-back of any team really in years. I mean, we've seen a whole bunch of different champions, a lot of parity at the top over these last 5 years, really ever since Kevin Durant and Steph Curry teamed up in Golden State. Every year it's been a different champion. So this was the year we thought, well, hey, maybe Boston – because they've got such an expensive roster, such a loaded roster, so many star players. They've got a great defense, obviously, a coach who really proved his mettle in last year's playoffs, and they've got this offense which is really pushing the boundaries of the three-point shot. They're taking more three-pointers than anybody in history by a lot, and they have a bunch of great three-point shooters. So this seemed like a formula that would say, well, maybe they could be a juggernaut. Maybe they could be a team that runs away with the conference. And lo and behold, they're 6 losses back right now in the standings behind the Cleveland Cavaliers, who they beat in last year's playoffs. And so it's been a real nice, unexpected twist to have Cleveland come out of the gate so hot, have them playing with such great ball movement, such great pace. It's a little bit of a small market versus big market story. Going back to the LeBron James days, there was obviously a rivalry there between the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Boston Celtics, too. So I think that's really where the intrigue has been in the East. The other factor that we've seen, not very many star trades have worked out very well in recent years in the NBA. Bradley Beal to the Phoenix Suns hasn't really worked out. Paul George to the Philadelphia 76ers hasn't really worked out. But one that has worked out brilliantly was Karl Anthony Towns to the New York Knicks. He's fit into that group. They have such an amazing spaced-out offense. Maybe they could, stand to have a little bit of a deeper bench. Maybe they could improve their defense a little bit. But they've been living up to expectations as one of the best teams in the conference as well. So to me, that's sort of state of play in the Eastern Conference. You've also got Giannis and the Bucks looming as always. But to me, I think it's probably going to come down to one of those 3 teams. And I think anybody who's sleeping on Cleveland, who thinks, well, maybe they're too young, maybe they haven't done it before. They have Donovan Mitchell as their leader, but maybe he's not really an MVP caliber player, so maybe they can't win a title. I think that's baloney. I think this is a real legit contender-type team, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I look forward to seeing where they could take this.
Well, I think that's a great point because, like you said, when they came out of the gate so hot, they being the Cavaliers, people thought this just isn't going to last. This is just one of those bumps that teams occasionally, they hit a roll. They start out on a roll. Cleveland's maintained that role, and I think for good reason. This is a very good basketball team, and I like the points that you made, Ben, about their ball movement, which all too often in today's NBA is not nearly as important in the offensive schematics as it needs to be. And Cleveland, I think, is demonstrating the benefits of good ball movement with good players. But 2 things I'd love your comment on. Garland as Mitchell's running mate in the backcourt and the effects of Mobley and his improvement and growth on this Cavalier team and their success.
Well, both those guys have been much better than last season. Garland just inexplicably had a horrible down year last year and was one of those years that was so bad you started to worry like, oh, well, this guy was like a very high lottery pick. Like, oh, this guy came out of the gate, was pretty good during his rookie contract. We thought he was going to take off. What's going on? And so you're wondering, well, maybe he can't fit with Mitchell. Maybe he's going to have to get a trade and leave town. I mean, there was all this kind of speculation last summer. I mean, he was dealing with a lot of injury issues last year, and I think that was the primary driver of his struggles because he's really turned it back around this season. He's, to me, an improved distributor in terms of how he's able to keep that ball rolling, and he's been just such a great fit with their new coach, Kenny Atkinson. Kenny Atkinson comes over from the Golden State Warriors. He also coached the Nets back in the day. And his whole thing is, like, it's not about one guy and a supporting cast. It's all about the group. That's, like, his approach, right? And so he wants to make sure Garland is empowered as a scorer, but also is making sure to keep all of their shooters involved. And they just have a ton of shooters on that team. The list goes on. Max Strus, and you could just go right down their roster, all these different guys who can hit three-pointers. And Garland's been great at being unselfish and keeping those guys involved. Now, Mobley, when he came out, he was viewed, from college at USC, he was viewed as a potential defensive player of the year, and he's lived up to that. He's kind of in that Anthony Davis or Jaren Jackson mold of a big, versatile defender, a guy who can block shots, but also step out and play on the perimeter. He's starting to come along a little bit on offense. They're finding ways to use him as kind of a counterpunch. When teams get stretched out too much defensively, he can go back to the rim. He can drive a little bit and get you some paint points, and they can put some pressure on the glass, which is helpful. And he's also trying to experiment a little bit with being a secondary facilitator and also a three-point shooter. So those are some of the layers he's added to his game. To me, he's still a work in progress. He's not the smoothest guy. I like to joke sometimes he looks like he needs an oil change, right? Like he's just not quite as fluid as a player, even like a Jared Jackson. Or you look at Wemby, Wemby is just such a naturally gifted athlete, and there's just a little bit of clunkiness to Evan Mobley's offensive game. But sometimes it doesn't matter if it's pretty. It just matters if it works. And what he does is gives them 5 offensive threats on the court at all times. Between him and Allen, both those guys can make your defense pay if you're not, paying them attention. You're not keeping them out of the paint. And so that's really what helps Cleveland's balance. Every night somebody else can beat you, and those teams are really dangerous. And I want to step back and make one point about the Cavaliers, which I can't prove it yet because it hasn't happened. But what we're seeing in the NBA right now, it's a little bit of a shift away from super teams. We're not seeing what we saw with like the Golden State Warriors with Steph Curry and Kevin Durant I mentioned earlier, or the Heatles with LeBron James and Dwayne Wade. What's winning right now in the NBA, it's balance, deep teams who have a lot of guys who can score. It's teams that have stars, but not necessarily the very best stars, right? Like you look at Oklahoma City in the West, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is incredible, but you look around his team, Jalen Williams is the next best player, and he's sort of a fringe all-star. A similar thing in Cleveland, you could make a case for 3 of their guys as all-stars, but they don't really have a top 10 player on that roster. A similar thing going on in Memphis with John Morant kind of in and out of the lineup with injury. They have a lot of good players, but not great players. And so I think some of this is being driven by how the salary cap works now, where you can't just go out there and buy stars and put them together on the same team. I think culture has never been more important. Having a winning culture, a hard-playing culture, a culture that says if everybody's shooting threes, that means it's going to be really hard to play defense. So we need to have a whole bunch of guys who want to play defense together. And then I think youth is also winning too. You look at the Cleveland Cavaliers, you look at the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Memphis Grizzlies, you got a lot of young legs on those teams. And so when people tell me, Cleveland's too young to really win a championship, or Oklahoma City's too young to win a championship, I just don't buy it, because I have really seen a strong change in style in terms of what wins in the NBA right now. And I think a lot of these teams that are winning during the regular season this year, once they get into the playoffs, they're going to keep winning in the playoffs because, three-pointers are still more valuable. Pace is still very important. Sure, the game is going to slow down a little bit. It always does. But I think that we've entered this kind of new era coming out of the pandemic where so much of it's about generating three-pointers and stopping three-pointers. And to do that, you got to have ball movement and you got to have a lot of young legs to run around and play defense.
Geez, that's a great summary. And I'd like before we jump to the Western Conference, I want to focus on a small point in what you just stated about how the NBA is functioning now. I was talking with someone, and they were saying to me, like, who's going to be the next LeBron? Who's going to be that new guy that comes in? And, we can talk about Wemby. We can talk about people that can fill those gaps. But when you look at the 3 players at the top of the pyramid right now, Antetokounmpo, Jokic, and Gilgeous-Alexander, all 3, as incredibly good as they are, have a mid-range element to their game. In an interior and a mid-range element to the game. And as you're talking about, like the Boston Celtics, shooting record numbers of three-pointers, the heavy emphasis on the 3 in the league, and the willingness of teams to take open threes or not even open threes quickly into the possession, and that goes to your point about pace. But But don't you feel, or do you feel, that the overlooking of the mid-range element to the game, both in terms of who the players are and how they're developing their game, and that goes back to my point of who's going to be the next star, like Gilgeous-Alexander and, Kawhi Leonard before all of the injury problems, players like that with a great mid-range game, Ben, just are next to impossible to guard, especially if they can shoot the three when they have that. It's the guys that are three and layups that are, I think, kind of taking away the identity of individualism in the players. Man, I really rambled on this point, but I'll bring it back.
No,
but you
totally
see where I'm going? You see where I'm going with it?
Yeah.
It's like it's become so extreme, and the analytics nerds in the back room have, I think, really, completely. I'm going to use the term poison because I'm really old, but I'm old school, but I'm looking at it and going, man, it can't just be layups, free throws, and threes. If you're going to be successful, but for the long term. And I think that ties into some of what you're describing about players, about teams rather, with a bunch of good players, but not necessarily a couple of superstars.
Well, I on the idea of shot selection and where you're going to get your points from. So, first of all, I think it's very important to acknowledge that the analytics was correct to a certain degree. Like, three is worth more than two. If you create threes consistently, you're probably going to have better offenses. And in the modern NBA, if you can't make threes as a team, if you can't generate them, you're probably not going to be able to keep up. You're probably not going to go deep in the playoffs. So that has to be a tool in your bag. But What you're saying is more about player development. You're saying, hey, you don't want to teach young guys that the only shots they could take are layups or threes, because that's ignoring a whole bunch of ways to score. And with that, I agree with you 100%. And I think what we're actually seeing in this modern era, the most valuable shots are going to be at the rim, and they're going to be out on the three-point arc. But defenses are smart, too. Defenses adapt, right? And they're going to try to take away those things. So let's use Giannis as an example. What did all the defenses do in the playoffs against Giannis? Because he wants to do nothing but dunk all over you at the rim. Well, they come up with the wall strategy where they put two or three defenders at the rim and say, well, you're not going to score at the rim. Well, what are you going to do now? Well, when he's earlier in his career, he doesn't have the mid-range shot. He doesn't have the three-point shot. He's not a very good free throw shooter. He's stuck. Milwaukee starts going out of the playoffs early. A similar thing I would say actually with Jokic, right? When he's starting his career, he's this big-bodied center. Nobody really knows what to do with him. A lot of his stuff is coming out at the rim in the basket area because he got all these great flips and floaters and lefty layups and all this kind of stuff. Well, soon enough, you start to attract all that attention, and you realize you need to have a plan B and a plan C. And the very best players have the most plans, right? Shea can go all the way to the rim one-on-one and completely shake free from his defender, get a layup, but he can also stop on a dime, pull up, and hit that beautiful 15-foot jumper that I know gets you excited because it probably looks a little bit like Michael Jordan, right? He could also now he's added that step-back three to his game as well. He's still not a knockdown three-point shooter, but the threat of that shot starts to open up other opportunities for him driving to the basket, or it just forces teams to double or trap him where now he can make a pass to his teammate and Oklahoma City's offense can really thrive. So I think if we're looking at this, from a development standpoint, we want to tell young players, hey, these are the best shots, but work on everything, right? Because eventually you're going to reach a level where teams are going to be able to take away what you do best, and you're going to need to have a counter. And that goes for team offenses, too. The Houston Rockets were the most, stick-to-the-script team we've ever seen when they had James Harden, and it was all threes and all layups. And I think if they could go back and run the simulation, if Harden would have just taken some of the mid-range shots that teams were giving him that were wide open during some playoff series, he might have a championship ring now. It's very possible if they had a more diverse approach to their offense and shot selection, and they weren't quite so rigid in terms of what shots they were taking, he probably could have scored more easily. They probably could have won some series that they lost. And so, you can never run the history back. But that's why I worry about the Celtics, too, because they are very, very rigid with the threes. And last year they won the championship. Their formula worked. All those three-pointers paid off. But, it's a make-or-miss league, as everybody will tell you. If you go through a cold streak at the wrong time, you can get knocked out by a team that's not as good as you. And I think that's going to be one of the big things that we want to watch in this year's playoffs. Are there moments where the Celtics adjust, Or if the threes aren't going, do they just go down with the ship?
I think that's a great point, Ben. And you're listening to the Basketball Show on Sports 1440. I'm your host, Paul Sir, joined by the Washington Post NBA lead, Ben Golliver. I think that's a great point. Live and die by the sword is really the mantra that the Celtics carry forward and is more and more prevalent in the NBA today. But you cannot, in my opinion, take away the value of the mid-range game. And I also think, Ben, from my perspective, to a point you made earlier about a team like Oklahoma City having a legitimate shot at winning a championship, to me it's because they have that diversity in their game that a number of other teams don't have, and I think that could possibly really serve them well in the playoffs.
The Thunder are my favorite team to watch this year by a lot. They might be my favorite team to watch of the last 5 years. And it's funny because we could definitely gush about their offense, but what I want to do first is gush about their defense. I don't think I've ever seen an NBA team, play harder collectively defensively than the Thunder do, and it's because they've collected a lot of good individual defensive players who are all willing to sacrifice for each other. It reminds me of like an elite college team where you have one of those old school coaches where like the players are brainwashed and will just do whatever he says. That's how they play defense, and they cover for each other so well and so often. Just watch their games. Don't even watch what they do on the offensive end. Watch how many deflections they get, how many steals they get, how often they get out into transition because their defense has forced turnovers. They're pretty small right now because Chet Holmgren, their starting center, is injured. They usually only play one big at a time, but they gang rebound together, right? So they get out-rebounded most games, but they certainly work hard at it. They box out like crazy. They've got a lot of length in terms of their perimeter players, so those guys can help out with some rebounds. And more than anything, they just work, and they crank it up in the second half consistently. You saw that against the Knicks in their comeback win a couple of days ago. You saw that again in their big win against the Celtics in the fourth quarter. The Celtics couldn't even score in the fourth quarter because Oklahoma City had cranked up their defense so high. So they are just such a treat to watch on that end. And I know a lot of people, when you're saying earlier about the ratings, and look, the NBA scoring has gotten out of control in the last 5 years. It's just up and up and up. But that does not mean there's no defense being played. There are some teams that have adjusted and have really put out elite defenses, and I would say Oklahoma City is at the top of the list. In terms of their offense, Shea is just, like, it's crazy. He could win MVP this year and still be underrated. I don't know when that's ever happened like that. It feels like it's almost impossible.
That seems like an oxymoron, but I get where you're going with it.
Right, but imagine if he was a Laker, right, or a Knick.
Oh, my God.
Imagine if he was playing in one of these big markets, how huge of a star he would be. And I'm sure he's huge up there for you guys in Canada, and he's starting to really grow here in the U.S. as well. But I think that he is still underappreciated, I guess is the word I would use for everything he does on offense. And they've just got a lot of good shooters around him, a lot of unselfish team-first players, and they are just very, very well coached. And that's what I like about their team, too. It's all about the focus of the group, right? And it starts with Mark Daigneault, who worked his way up from their G League team up into this head coaching position. When they hired him, nobody knew who he was, right? He was like a virtual unknown, and he's got a case as the best coach in the NBA for the last couple of years. It reminds me a lot of how Spoelstra made his rise in Miami. And if I was looking at USA basketball, by the way, you guys probably don't want to hear this because, I guess we're big rivals now. But when USA basketball starts looking for their next coach, I would look at Mark Daigneault because that guy knows how to put together a culture. He knows how to get guys to play hard. He's young. He relates to the players. He doesn't have to scream at them to get his point across. I think he's got a lot of the characteristics that you would want in a dream team type coach. Even though he's playing in Oklahoma City, he doesn't have the dream team headliners besides Shea.
Well, I think it's a great point because once you get into the FIBA basketball world, it's a whole different set of dynamics that you could see even with the USA team this past summer in Paris. NBA players, especially American NBA players, do not adapt that easily to the FIBA game. It's just a very different game. By the way, people talk about fixing the NBA. If you ever want to fix the NBA, play a 48-minute FIBA game. I'd love to watch that with NBA players. I think that would be a really entertaining league. I'm going to go back to the East, to one other comment you made about the trade between the Timberwolves. As you know, Ben, I'm from the Midwest and lived for a long time in the Twin Cities. So, I've been one of those long-suffering fans who just, shake your head and, suffer from low self-esteem because of all of the bad moves they've made throughout their history. So they finally start seeming to get things going this past year. They make a trade. You can kind of understand, and you look at, trading the way they did for Randall and for DiVincenzo, and you go, this maybe should work out. They really shouldn't lose anything. Towns is kind of up and down, but man, oh man, Cat, for whatever reason, just the blend with Thibodeau, the blend with the teammates, the chemistry, so much in the NBA really is who you play with and play for that determines how good you are. But my God, has he thrived in New York.
And so much of it, it's so simplistic to say, but a lot of it is just spacing, right? Cat has these huge numbers in New York because they don't have anybody else in the paint. They play this great 5-out style. Everybody's got room to operate. They've got a lot of skilled offensive players, and they just kind of go nuts, right? It's not like it's open gym, but it kind of feels like that sometimes because, they're just a very difficult team to defend. And when you look at Minnesota, of course they sacrifice spacing with that trade. And what do we hear from Anthony Edwards? It's complaints after almost every single game about how he's getting double teamed, about how they don't quite have the offensive rhythm, how maybe they need somebody else to kind of like initiate, kind of be a table setter for that group. And it really boils down to Karl Anthony Towns can shoot threes and he has gravity and it opens up the paint. And a player like Julius Randle can't really shoot threes, doesn't have the gravity, and always wants to do all of his scoring kind of, going towards the basket on tough shots, spin moves in traffic and that kind of thing. So that trade has really backfired on Minnesota. I think if I was the Timberwolves, I would be trying to trade Randle as hard as possible prior to the deadline because he just doesn't fit. If he's going to work somewhere, it's not going to be Minnesota. So I think that they need to try to do whatever they can to get some of that spacing back. Now, it could be a cheaper player. It doesn't have to be a star like Karl Anthony Towns, but you just need someone else who can go out there and consistently knock down threes and make life easier for Anthony Edwards because right now he's playing with McDaniels, Randall, and Gobert. None of those guys are hitting their shots. And Dante DiVincenzo, the other guy who came over in the trade, his shot quality is so much worse in Minnesota because the spacing is bad. He's not really hitting his threes either. I guarantee you if you traded Randall for some sort of spacing, you would get better production from Anthony Edwards. You would get better production from DiVincenzo. And even a guy like Gobert would have more room to operate in the paint. So we'll see if they can find anybody who's willing to take Randall on. But if I could have any player traded from any team in the NBA right now before the deadline, it would actually be Julius Randle because I enjoyed watching that Timberwolves playoff run. It was great up there in Minnesota for some of those playoff games where they're going against the Denver Nuggets and the Dallas Mavericks. And Luka hit a big shot on them up there in that building. Like, it was a tense, fun atmosphere. And this year it's just been a real whoopee cushion.
Yes, the Minnesota Timberwolves whoopee cushion. I think you've got a merchandising idea here that could fly in Minnesota. I'm talking with Ben Golliver from the Washington Post here on the Basketball Show on Sports 1440. Let's jump over to the Western Conference. You, of course, live in, unfortunately, fire-plagued Los Angeles, but you get a lot of chance to look at the Clippers, to look at the Lakers. But let's talk about the Western Conference this year. If I could use the circus term topsy-turvy, I think I'd be able to almost pull it off, as corny as it is. But the Western Conference, in my mind, Ben, has not been what I thought it was going to be at the beginning of the year. It's really taken on a different form in terms of who the best teams are. And that's not to say that the quality of the Western Conference has gone down. I think it's still very, very high. It's a bunch of new teams.
Well, there's definitely some new blood. You got the Grizzlies back in there. You got the Spurs with Wembanyama kind of getting themselves into the mix. You've got a Houston Rockets team really playing above its head. It's another example, by the way, of one of those teams with depth and defense. Yes. And togetherness that I was talking about earlier, rather than like high-end star power, that's really been winning a lot during this regular season. So I'd really say all those teams are pleasant surprises. so far. I think the other big storyline, though, it's got to be the older guys coming off of the Olympic gold medal, Steph, LeBron, and KD, all coming back to earth a little bit, right? And the Lakers have had some moments here and there recently, but they really can't win on the road. They don't have the consistency. LeBron has looked old at times this season. There's been whispers and rumors like, would this be the last year? Maybe next year's is going to be his last year. So that kind of talk has really started to pick up during the season for the first time that I can really remember down here. The Warriors are just average. They're just not that good of a team. They don't have a ton of talent. They went through a cost-cutting cycle over the summer, and it's really showing with their product on the court. And the Suns, talk about topsy-turvy,
yes,
to use your term. 8-1 to start the season. I'm thinking, well, maybe Kevin Durant's finally going to have another shot in the playoffs. Have they even won a game since? It feels like they've been on like a 2-month losing streak. Now they're maybe trying to trade Bradley Beal for Jimmy Butler and getting even more desperate. It's really been a mess down there in Phoenix. So I would say all those teams in their own ways, the Lakers, Warriors, and Suns, have been the victims of some of the pleasant surprise teams that we were talking about a minute ago.
Well, that concludes this part of the interview with Ben Golliver. We went on for about another 13 minutes, and that will be on our podcast that we will be posting after the show is over today. We're going to do an exclusive deep dive podcast with Ben Golliver. That'll be part of 3 podcasts that we're going to offer after this show. So we're going to take a break right now, and when we come back, we're going to be talking 3x3 with two of Edmonton's best 3x3 players, 2 of Canada's best 3x3 players, 2 of the world's best 3x players, and Steve Sir and Michelle Plouffe. And we also have 2 very special guests in the studio as well. You're listening to The Basketball Show on Sports 1440. Thanks so much for being with us today.